Hello, and welcome to How Election Officials Are Preparing for the 2024 Presidential Election. I'm Maddie Tate-Smith, Senior Communications Manager for Campaign Legal Center. Thank you all so much for joining us. CLC is a national, nonpartisan organization working to advance democracy through law at the federal, state, and local levels. We fight for every American's right to participate in the democratic process. We believe our democracy should be transparent, accountable, and inclusive. Election officials spend months preparing for an election, from ordering ballots to conducting voter education and outreach. Yet much of this work goes largely unnoticed or is misunderstood by the electorate. Election officials are our neighbors and friends who consistently dedicate long hours before, during, and after Election Day to ensure our elections are safe, secure, and accurate. Despite the recent challenges faced by election workers, including increasing levels of threats and abuse, most states have delivered successful primaries with very few issues as they plan for another monumental election in November. The success of recent elections demonstrates these officials' commitment to ensuring access to the ballot box for all voters, and their work has only just begun. During today's panel, you'll hear directly from election officials and policy experts about the tried and tested systems in place to make sure that votes are cast fairly and counted correctly. Furthermore, you'll find out more about what election officials are focused on between now and when voting begins in their states for the general election. This insider perspective will showcase why their work is such an important part of ensuring our democracy functions the way it's supposed to. At this time, I'd like to hand things over to Kelley, Senior Director for Policy and Strategic Partnerships at Campaign Legal Center, who will moderate today's event. Catie, take it away.
Thank you, Maddie. Thanks for the introduction. I'm very happy to be moderating this panel today. A few housekeeping items before we get started. During the conversation, please use the comment section on Facebook and YouTube to submit your questions for the panel. At the end of the panel, we'll have Q&A for your questions. We may not be able to get to every question today, but we will do our best. If we don't get to your question, please feel free to reach out to a member of our press. If you're a member of the press, please reach out to us at media@campaignlegal.org. And if you're a member of the public and we don't get to your question today, please reach out to info@campaignlegal.org. Now that we got that out of the way, let's introduce our panelists. First, we have Francisco Aguilar, who was elected as Nevada's Secretary of State in 2022. He is responsible for supervising state and local elections in the Silver State. Following an exodus of election workers across Nevada due to increased threats and intimidation, Secretary Aguilar has been a champion and helped pass a unanimous election worker protection bill in the state last year. Welcome, Secretary Aguilar. Next, we have Lisa Posthumus Lyons, a lifelong resident of Michigan's Kent County, where she is serving her second term as County Clerk and Register of Deeds. The Clerk's office is responsible for managing all county elections. Prior to her election as Clerk and Register, Lisa served as a state representative for the 86th District, representing portions of Kent and Iona counties in the Michigan House of Representatives from 2011 to 2016. During this time, she was also chairwoman of the House Election and Ethics Committee. Thanks for joining us, Clerk Lyons. Next, we have Nott, Senior Legal Counsel for Voting Rights at the Campaign Legal Center. In her role, Lata advocates for state and federal policies that improve and protect access to the ballot, ensure that every vote is counted, and builds confidence in our electoral processes. And last but not least, Al Schmidt, who serves as Secretary of the Commonwealth in Pennsylvania. Secretary Schmidt is Pennsylvania's chief election official and a member of the governor's executive board. Prior to his appointment to the Secretary of Commonwealth. Schmidt was the president of the Committee of the 70, who I will add is a great ally and partner of CLC's. Love working with that organization. And he also served as a Philadelphia City Commissioner for a decade and sat on a bipartisan board of elections during the 2020 election. A tough spot to be in during 2020. Thank you, Secretary Schmidt. Thanks to all our panelists, and I'll say everybody's going to get a chance to chime in on every question, and we're excited to get right into the discussion with all of you. Secretary Schmidt, I'd like to start with you, and if you could talk us through a little bit about how you plan for a successful election. I thought Maddie did a great job teeing us up in terms of talking about the months and even longer time it takes to plan for a successful election. So tell us a little bit about what that process looks like in Pennsylvania.
Well, I ran elections at the county level in Pennsylvania for 10 years. So in many ways, I'm a recovering election administrator at the county level. I know how challenging it is. And I also know how, at the end of the day, elections are really run at the local level, at least in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania Department of State has an important oversight responsibility. There are certain authorities that we have and a supporting role that is very important to me, especially as you mentioned earlier, the significant turnover of people responsible for running elections. The Pennsylvania Department of State and the Shapiro administration has set up a training team to help when you have new election administrators. Somebody might have had some role at the county level for many years and find out a couple months before election day that they're now responsible for running elections. So we recruited a team of experienced election administrators to train them in an environment with intense scrutiny, where any mistake is perceived as being intentional and malicious and seeking to influence the outcome of an election. So that's been a real priority for us, is training new election administrators to make sure everyone has all the resources that they need, all the training they need to make sure that elections in Pennsylvania are free, fair, safe, and secure, and as you said, accurate.
Thanks very much, Secretary Schmidt. Secretary Aguilar, would you like to chime in on this one? What are you doing to prepare for the elections this year?
Yeah, I'm a novice to elections. Obviously, I come from a different background. I come from the private sector. And so being involved in the election space has been really fascinating. You know, as Elle said, it's our responsibility really to be a regulator. The local officials are the executors of the election. There is that decentralized model intentionally, and I appreciate the work that they do, but figuring out where we can support them as the Secretary of State, understanding their challenges and understanding where they need resources is probably our biggest role. You know, I served as chair of the Nevada Athletic Commission, which regulates boxing and UFC. And that's really where I learned my responsibility as a regulator. It's our job to follow the law. It's our job to follow the regulation. It's our job to call balls and strikes and make those hard decisions to ensure that the integrity of the system continues long into the future. One of the things we've recognized in Nevada is we have not invested a lot into our infrastructure and our resources. You know, we are a battleground state like Pennsylvania. We are a purple state, and we have 2 counties with the major population centers. Clark County is 70% of the vote. Washoe County, 17% of the vote, and the 15 remaining rural counties are 13%. But doesn't mean one county is more important than the other. We have to continue to ensure that those clerks are well prepared. 11 of our 17 clerks throughout the state are new to their positions. 2 of those 11 already cycled out in the last 6 months. So we have a lot of training and preparation and support that we needed to do. We just finished our primary election yesterday. I'm super proud of the team and how they worked both at the state level and at the local level. We did some things that I feel are pretty innovative to build that voter experience, but also give Nevadans what they expect and what they want at the end of an election day.
Thanks for your comments. And I would just say thank you for joining us the day after your primary. That's a very busy week for you also. I appreciate that. Clerk Lyons, they've teed you up nicely. You are really where the rubber meets the road. Let's hear about your preparations.
Oh, I so appreciate that acknowledgement of the boots on the ground at the local level. And here in Michigan, as a home rule state, we even go further down into that granular model down into our townships and our cities where those clerks are busy in preparations along with my office. We plan for this election the way we've planned for every election before it and the way we're going to plan for every election coming after it. And that's with months and months of preparation. We're working with our local clerks on the pre-election process. And that includes, right now, we're putting out public notices just to notify the electorate that there's an election coming up. We're in the middle of actually printing our paper ballots, which is, it's a massive undertaking. And those ballots have just been approved recently this past week, and now they're at the printer, getting ready to be shipped out to our absentee and overseas voters to comply with that federal move deadline. So this is all happening right now while most voters, although they're seeing a lot of volatile political ads, they're really not even engaged in the actual process. Additionally, we're working on training our election workers, our election inspectors. We in Kent County train anywhere from 1,500 to 2,000 election workers to go out into our precincts, into our absentee counting boards and our early voting sites. So that pre-election process is really critical in making sure that we're having a successful election. And then kind of that one thing to wrap up pre-election process is our testing of equipment. We test our election equipment prior to every single election to make sure that the equipment is functioning properly, that the tapes are zeroed out before any votes are tabulated. And that testing really helps ensure that election day goes smoothly with our equipment. So that's kind of what we're doing to prepare administratively. The other aspect that we deal with is obviously voter education. That's a critical component of making sure our elections are successful. Just teaching the electorate about the process, where to vote, how to get registered, just those educational efforts. And at our level, my office works with and prepares behind the scenes with our local law enforcement to make sure our elections are safe for both voters and election workers alike. That's a big component of our election day process and preparation. We don't talk much about it because, I don't want voters to know what our plan is, but I want them to know we have a plan. That's critical. And then the most important thing I think we can do as leaders to help prepare for a successful election is simply set the tone. As a leader, that's important to me, to make sure that we are not operating with, fear and angst and alarm. Vigilance, yes, but really to just make sure that our voters have full expectation. It's my job to set that tone, to set the expectation of what the voters can plan for in the election process. The expectation that everybody is going to be treated with respect. We're going to honor everybody's constitutional rights, and it's going to be a great day. And the voters can really celebrate what makes our country so great, and that is their elections that they participate in. It really should be a celebration. We do all that preparation on the front end, so it's a celebration during that day.
Thanks very much for that, Lata. Anything to add on this one?
Yeah,
I'm sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, while I don't plan elections myself, my work at CLC is focused on making sure voters can access the ballot box. And the groundwork for that, for a successful election, is just laid a long time in advance with laws and regulations that make elections safe and accessible and ensure that every voter can participate. Things like accessible voter registration, early voting and mail voting options, plans that ensure that polling places are conveniently located, providing materials in multiple languages in areas with significant non-English speaking populations. And as Lisa mentioned, voter education about all of these things. There's obviously a lot of logistics involved in this, and it's not an easy job by any means.
Thank you. Secretary Schmidt, did you have something to add?
Oh, I was only going to echo the point that Lata just made, and Lisa and Cisco, which is like, I know when I first got involved in running to be city commissioner, which is a position responsible for running elections, I remember hearing time and again, and I'm sure the others have encountered as well, what do you do with the other 363 days of the year? Because a lot of people don't understand how much hard work goes in to preparing for the primary, preparing for the general year round. It's not 2 days a year. While there might be times of the year that are slower than the others, it's more like they're just normal work days as opposed to working 7 days a week, around the clock. So it's I think the more people know about elections, the more confidence they have in elections. And this is just not something people pull off 2 days a year. There's a tremendous amount of work involved at the state and especially the county level in preparing that when voters show up to vote, they can cast their vote and have their vote counted.
Thanks for that. I mean, just looking at the calendars for the 3 states represented on this call, with Michigan and Nevada not having a presidential on the same day as the state primary. So, you've got 3 election days this year and possibly more if you have specials and any other local elections thrown in there. So, right, not 2 days a year, maybe more than 2 elections in a year, and all the preparation that goes into making those days successful. Thank you. Secretary Aguilar, we're going to let you start with this next question, and it's about all the mis and disinformation we are seeing around elections and all the intentional efforts to sow distrust in the process. We've really seen an uptick in these mis and disinformation campaigns starting in 2020 and carrying throughout 2022 and into this election as well. What are you doing in Nevada to try to get ahead of this, and any thoughts on what can be done to try and build trust in the process?
Yes, absolutely. It's, I do have to refer to a situation that occurred within the last 2 weeks. We had a trusted media organization report on a project and our tabulation timelines here in Nevada for the primary election. And in that article, it was inaccurate in regards to our state law and how we are to handle the tabulation. That article was released from a trusted news source and went into the hands of those individuals who are trying to make our jobs harder every day. They took that article because it's a trusted source by the average American and used it to create havoc for our team and our office for a few days. And so when we talk about disinformation and misinformation, and you're reporting about elections, it's not a time to sensationalize the headline. It's not a time to create clickbait. It is a time to be serious and accurate. And when you're going to refer to a state or a local government's laws and statutes and regulations, you better be sure that you are writing accurately about those statutes, because they can be easily distorted and they can have severe consequences. And so when we start talking about misinformation, we have to look at our trusted news sources to be the leaders in this area to make sure they get it right the first time around. Because yes, they can go back and do corrections, but the information's already out there. It's already been read. For example, the article, we had another situation too, where the articles had a sensational headline and it went into the print edition of the paper. But the online version was actually corrected and updated with a fair headline. And so that starts such a cycle and such a mess that it sometimes gets ahead of it. But one thing we've done that I was really excited about early on is, as we were going through the presidential preferential primary in February, there was a lot of misinformation and disinformation about what was happening. And we simply took a simple sheet and said, myth, fact. And we did it in language that majority of the voters could understand and could read, and a quick review. That piece of paper, that PDF, flew around this state so fast and so quick, but it accomplished exactly what we needed it to accomplish. And so we don't have to be super creative. We don't have to be a Nike. We don't have to be a big brand to come up with a creative campaign. It's simple, easy to use. Also, to figuring out how do we reach our communities that speak other languages. I am a social Spanish speaker. Spanish was my mom's first native language, but I am not a technical Spanish speaker. But we still went to Univision this past Saturday and sat down with the anchor to talk about some of the issues facing the Latino community when it comes to voting. And it's just reaching our populations where we know they are and having simple, easy conversations.
Thank you for that, Secretary Aguilar. And we have found too, there's just such a lack of accessible and reliable information. And so a lot of times it's just.
Well, you bring up a great point. Like, some of our trusted journalists, some of our trusted sources of news have paywalls. 80% of voters in Nevada probably are not reading that information because of the paywall. And so were we sending them for information? We're sending them to the exact places we're trying to fight right now with dis and misinformation. So when we talk about news and information across the society, we have to decide, what do we value? Do we value the information on elections getting out to the public in a verified, secure way? Or are we wanting to figure out how to make a dollar during a time of we're fighting for our democracy?
A lot of competing interests there, but hopefully you are getting support from the media on getting your correct information out there. Clerk Lyons, any comments from you on mis and disinformation?
Yeah, I'm generally an optimist by nature, but I've come to be a realist when it relates to misinformation, disinformation. I don't think we can preempt disinformation. It's just, we're in an information age where everyone has a platform, and you don't have to be accurate to have a message, and to get that out, you don't have to be truthful. And so, and if we were kind of focusing on stopping this misinformation in one regard, it's almost like whack-a-mole. You can't even expect, or you couldn't even imagine what could possibly arise. Case in point being a conspiracy about Sharpie markers bleeding through ballots and canceling out votes, which couldn't be further from the truth, or from accuracy. And that started as intentional disinformation, but as things get legs and spread, it reaches unwittingly just genuine individuals who think they're getting accurate information, and then they spread it. And so it's, what may start as intentional just grows, it spreads like wildfire by even the most well-meaning of our public. So it's just one of those things that we've always got to contend with it, especially now in this information age with everybody having a platform. The point is to have a plan, have those relationships with your local media sources. That's really important, and to help ensure that you are having a rapid response should anything begin to grow. A lot of times, sometimes it's just a phone call that you get, or individual concerns that you're putting out. But when they start getting legs, you've got to have that rapid response communication effort, and that's where your partnerships with media and with with online blogs and all these different facets of getting information out to the public. But our republic is reliant on public trust in the process, and public trust in that process is reliant upon understanding of and integrity in that process. And so I really think to help build trust among the voters in this age where there's so much misinformation, it's about three things. It's about education, it's about transparency, and it's about participation. I talked a lot about our efforts for voter education. I'll go anywhere and talk to anyone, any group, to explain the process, because information is power. And when they have that information, it's much more difficult to become susceptible to purposeful or unintentional misinformation. And so to equip people with how our process works, the multiple checks and balances that we have to go through from beginning prior to the election day, and even after the election, is so important for them to know, because the more they know, I think Al, you mentioned it, the more they know, the more they can trust. And I also tell them, don't take my word for it, see for yourself. That's where participation comes in. All of our election planning and our post-election process, and even election day, that's open to the public. It is their elections. It's so important that they have the ability to watch it unfold right before their eyes. And if it's kind of a learn by doing, a learn by seeing. If you're watching it unfold, you go to our public election equipment tests. If you go to our public our public post-election canvas, our recounts are public, our audits are public. There's so many ways for individuals to see the process for themselves to build trust. And then, finally with that is go work the elections yourself. This is the best way to learn how our elections work and to become a part of the process. And, it's all about being run by your friends, your family, your neighbors, and those are people you trust. And so, really making sure that we're being educating people any way we can, both from the state level to the roles that we play as election officials, and then creating ambassadors for elections through the public and through other interested citizens, and then just being transparent. Roll out the red carpet for your public, for your campaigns, your candidates, your media, to watch the process at every stage, and then encourage them to participate. It's that's the best way that we can combat misinformation or get ahead of it, is by an educated public.
Thanks for those comments. Lata, I'd like to hear from you on this as well, from an outside perspective.
Of course. Getting ahead of mis and disinformation, this is something that has to be fought on a few different fronts. And we just heard about the lengths that election officials go through to get out good information. And of course, the news media plays a huge role in what gets amplified, as Secretary Aguilar noted. But I'd also like to note that civic engagement organizations conduct voter education campaigns and outreach efforts to underserved communities every election year to get them the information that they need to participate. And that sometimes trusted messengers, people from those communities, are the best way to go when you're getting out information to people. They're such a crucial part of the struggle to ensure that voters can trust the process.
Thanks for that. And Secretary Schmidt, I'll give you the last word on this question.
I would just add that elections, I know in Pennsylvania and elsewhere, elections have changed so much in the past several years, but they've changed for the better, and they've never been more safe and secure. And thanks to Act 77 in Pennsylvania, which brought about mail-in ballot voting and other changes to the system, there's a voter verifiable paper ballot record of every vote that's cast, that's used in not one, but two audits after every election. And I'm not talking about cyber ninja audits or any of that nonsense. The audits conducted after every election to make sure the tabulated results are accurate, including hand counting the different races in the two audits that we have. So I understand that people have questions. And I also think it's important when people ask questions that they are willing to have their questions answered. And they're not just asking questions to undermine confidence in the process. And that's something we've seen time and time again. We have 4 years after 2020, we're still all dealing with the same nonsense that we heard then, despite it having no basis in fact, despite no court in this country at the federal or state level, Republican judges or Democratic judges alike, seeing any evidence of any of that. But in some ways, it's almost like a tattoo in this point. Like, we should address it, we should acknowledge it, but it's not something easily removed 4 years on. We got to speak to that 30% that don't have a confidence in our election results. We can't ignore the 70% that have reached conclusions based on, I'm sorry to sound condescending, but based on reality. We have to speak to them too. But that 30% deserves to have their questions answered. I know Cisco and Lisa and others and CLC have always worked to make sure the truth is told about elections. And we need to continue doing that, as frustrating as it can be at times.
Well, I think that's so right. And the work is never done on this, right? And we can prepare for what we've seen raised in the past, but there's going to be some other misinformation, some other conspiracy theory that we all are going to have to address this year. Clerk Lyons, I'd like to turn to you to kick us off for the next question, and I'd like to hear a little bit about, and several of you have touched on this already, but what has changed or improved in terms of Michigan's elections since 2020? There have been a lot, especially for Michigan, lots of changes. And so I'd love to hear a little bit about some of those changes that you all have put in place for this election.
Yes, certainly. There are a tremendous amount of changes here in Michigan since 2020. Just to kind of touch on the election process as a whole, in 2022, voters in Michigan by a 59% vote approved Proposal 2, which we are now entering early voting. Which is something that we're implementing both at the county level in some jurisdictions. Some jurisdictions are doing it at, again, that more local level. So this is kind of this year is our first statewide effort in early voting method. And we're really taking a lot of our energy to make sure we're getting that done right and well, to make sure it's done securely as well as conveniently. So early voting is a big, huge change here. We also have, as part of that, we are now sending out automatic absentee ballots to voters who have signed an application that said, they applied for an absentee ballot, they signed that application and checked that they want to receive a ballot for every election going forward into the future. So that automatic ballot list is a big change for us. Prior to that, every single absentee ballot that went out had to have an application tied to that. So that's a big change, and it's going to result in, which I think will be an improvement in our voter lists, making sure that they're well maintained, that they're updated, that they're accurate. So a lot of the changes are kind of precipitating things that we're going to be improving upon or already have been. So those are kind of the big changes we're dealing with in Michigan. Improvements, iron sharpens iron. And since 2020, we've really upped our game because the public is more interested. There's a greater spotlight. There's more skepticism. So really, it's really required, us to ensure more professionalism rather than, because again, these are your friends and your family. So it can, rather than complacency or casual operations, we're professionalizing this role. We're making sure everybody understands the magnitude of the responsibility that they're taking on. We have more security around our drop boxes, which drop boxes aren't new. They weren't new in 2020, but again, more and more people are focused on that. So we've implemented more security measures in that regard, and making sure we've got a proper documented chain of custody on a regular basis for those areas. We're developing systems for our voters to track their absentee ballot at every stage of the process. Those things breed trust, they breed confidence, and it was born out of some of this chaos that we had to go through in 2020. So again, I think optimist by nature, I think there's a lot of things moving forward that have been approved upon because of it. Voter education, again, is another one of those big things. We're just better at communicating about elections to the public. We're more intentional, we're more vigilant. And Al, I think you hit the nail on the head. We're meeting people where they're at. We're not dismissive of people's concerns. You cannot be. You have to take every concern legitimately. It's got to be investigated, and then it's got to, if it's something that has merit and needs to be addressed, you go for it. If it's not, that's when you engage this, telling the truth about the process. That's when we're really working to be better communicators and ambassadors across the board, because 2020 taught us that voters know very little about their elections beyond casting their ballot.
Thank you for that. And, all those changes you made really echoing the points that you think are so important, right? Transparency, accessibility, all of those things lining up nicely with what's going on in terms of the state level changes. Secretary Aguilar, I'll turn to you next. What changes are in place since 2020?
Where do you want me to start? I can take up the remainder amount of the time, but we are in the middle of a top-down voter registration implementation of a new system. So that's very exciting. We will have that for the general election. You know, we have changed the way we are tabulating results so that we're getting information to Nevada voters when they expect them. And I don't want to see Nevada during the general election in that position when it's 266, and the country is waiting on us. That is my biggest fear. That keeps me up at the middle of the night. But it's really remembering one fact, that our elections are about people. They're about the voters first, they're about the candidates, and they're about the election and poll workers. Without election workers and poll workers, we do not have our election system. And reminding people to bring back the decency into the process. You know, I spent yesterday's primary day visiting 4 different polling sites and personally thanking the poll workers that were there. And what was surprising to me was seeing the new generation of poll workers coming into place. We've spent a lot of time strategically thinking about where we're going to go recruit poll workers. We have partnered with Vet the Vote, which has been phenomenal, but also focusing on the youth. In Nevada, you can be 16 and be a poll worker. So we spent time talking to high schools and talking to high school students about it. And one of the polling locations we visited yesterday, it's at what's called the Hollywood Recreation Center in a highly Latino community, community with a lot of Latino families. And there was a mom there with her 4 children working the poll. And then as we exited, we met a father and his son who were also working the polls. And I think it's remembering again, bringing it back. We can make all the technical changes we want, all the regulatory changes we can, but it comes back again to the people and recognizing that we have to be decent to each other.
That's great. And we really are training the new generation of poll workers. You got kids there. I love that. Secretary Schmidt, changes in the Commonwealth since 2020.
Just to add very briefly, as I referenced before, mail-in ballot voting was new to Pennsylvania in 2020, passed by a Republican House and a Republican Senate, and signed by a Democratic governor in 2019. Unrelated to the COVID environment, it wasn't even on the horizon. So not only do we have a paper ballot record of every vote that's cast, which I referenced earlier, that's used in not 1 but 2 audits, but the processing of mail-in ballots and the auditing and all of that is open to the public to view by the different parties, by the different candidates. They get to see all of it from tooth to tail with absolute transparency every step of the way, to alleviate whatever concerns they have. And whenever they have concerns, we seek to address them, provided they have some sort of basis in reality. And sometimes that's where I'm not naive to this. I was involved in Republican politics for a long time. I get the partisan political angle in a lot of it. I understand why sometimes people do what they do, but they have to understand that this has consequences. It has consequences in confidence in our entire system of government as a representative democracy. And it has consequences to Cisco and Lisa and secretaries of state, and especially people at the county level, when all these accusations and all of these conspiracies result in people believing them and acting out as a result. As we saw people in Virginia reading some nonsense about, it's so absurd, like a truckload of Chinese counterfeit mail-in ballots being smuggled in by Italian organized crime figures to the film. I'm sorry, I'm laughing. It's not a funny thing. It's just so absurd. But putting guns in their car to come up to the Pennsylvania Convention Center, where our ballot tabulation efforts were centralized, to stop this or head it off or whatever else. So people believe these things and they act accordingly. So these things, it comes as, there's a big consequence, confidence in the system, and also people acting out because they believe a lot of this nonsense that they might simply read from some idiot uncle on Facebook, let alone how much more believable this has become with the evolution of AI and how convincing that can be.
Lata, we're going to give you the final word on this one. And just zooming out a little bit, what do you see kind of across states and from the national perspective on changes since 2020?
I think something that all of my co-panelists noted that is true nationally is that one thing that's changed since the 2020 election is that there's just so much more awareness of election officials and the job that they do. As Clerk Lyons said, there's a spotlight on them now. And as Secretary Schmidt said, the more people know about elections, the more confidence they have in them. So generally that awareness can be a good thing. But the problem is that when there are things that voters don't know, disinformation tends to fill those gaps. And because bad actors have been spreading disinformation that sows distrust in the system, election workers have been the target of more and more threats. But at the same time, I'm a bit of an optimist too. We have seen states pass laws to protect their election workers. Michigan and Nevada recently passed laws that protect election workers, not just when they're at the polling place, but from any harassment or threats that they receive in connection with their jobs, whether that's during early voting, during the vote counting process, or after the results have been announced and there are people who are disgruntled about them. It really recognizes that that kind of harassment can take stage before or after election day, anywhere in that process. And that's such an improvement because it's a sign that policymakers are realizing the importance of election workers. All of the amazing changes that have increased access to the ballot in Michigan, Nevada, and Pennsylvania, and lots of other states, all of these require more of election workers. And our democracy, it suffers and it loses a great deal of institutional knowledge when election workers leave their jobs because of threats and harassment. So I'd say it's good to see legislators taking this seriously.
Thanks for that. And I feel like I would love to ask you all more questions, but we are going to let our audience ask questions as well. So we'll go ahead and turn to the audience Q&A. First question is from Adam Edelman, NBC News. The RNC is putting together what they say could be a 100,000 person force to poll monitors and watchers, as well as volunteer attorneys. Their own recruitment and trainings kick off Friday in Michigan. How are your local officials prepared to deal with that kind of effort?
Thank you. I'll start with that answer, being the resident Michigander on the panel. I think poll challengers play a critical role in our process. They play a critical role in making sure there's accountability, in the election day operations. They play an important role in another check and balance to the process. The key to our poll challengers is making sure they are adequately trained and prepared, that they know their role and their responsibilities clearly, that they know the election laws and how they're administered. And it's also, the flip side, knowing, making sure that our election inspectors, our election workers are just prepared to have that, that kind of oversight. Again, it's all about transparency, but our election workers also need to be very well versed on what those roles and responsibilities are. So that way, the least combative or confrontational we can make it, the better, because they do play an important role in the process in every area. And it's been unfortunate to see this role taking on a more combative nature. So again, I think that training is critical. And if the RNC needs resources to make sure that they're providing great top-notch training to their election workers or to their poll watchers, I'm happy, we're happy to provide that information. Another thing, as far as recruiting election inspectors, that's something that I started doing immediately after 2020, because again, the best way to have confidence in the process is to see it for yourself. That may come with some risk, certainly, with bad actors. We've experienced that here in Kent County. We're in the middle of a prosecution of an election worker who took information from our electronic poll book, downloaded it onto a personal flash drive, and took it out with him. That person is being prosecuted. It's going through the court system right now. I'm hoping that we see an appeal to our Supreme Court at our Supreme Court level. So there are consequences is the best word for that. When you take on something that has risk, I think the reward can be much greater than that risk, though, when you engage more and more people into the process. We also experience lopsided jurisdictions, whether it's a city or a township, where they have too many Democratic workers, and they can't recruit Republican workers in that jurisdiction, or vice versa in other jurisdictions. And so while we can coordinate amongst ourselves and dispatch proper political affiliated election workers, just to have a greater pool from each of our political parties is a benefit to us.
I agree with Lisa absolutely on the training and preparedness. However, you have to invest in voter education at the same time.
100%.
Thank you for that. All right, let's turn to our next audience question from Matt at State Line. Secretary Aguilar, a law that protects election workers from threats survived a challenge in April. Can you talk about the threats that officials face and how it impacts your work?
Yes, the law has passed. We have defended that law already once in the federal courts. However, that law is now being appealed to the Ninth Circuit. And so we're preparing for that case or that trial or hearing or whatever we're going through. But we have not used the law yet because of the fact that I think people truly understand the value of our election workers and our poll workers. That is a law that is there for a very extreme, intense case, and we haven't seen it yet. We have experienced harassment, threats, intimidation, but they haven't risen to the level to use the law. What we're seeing is more of an overwhelming of officials. It's using the legal system. It's using FOIA requests. And look, I started my career in a newsroom. I worked with the newsroom to defend them on different issues. I am a favor of FOIA requests because they do have a purpose and an intent. However, when a bad actor starts to use that as a weapon, it hurts the entire process. My team spends a significant amount of time responding to those FOIA requests. And it's not because they're trying to find something or they're trying to, we are completely transparent about what we do. I am available and open to talk to anyone, anytime when it comes to the election. But when you use a certain tool to intimidate or harass or overwhelm, that's when it becomes a problem. And so people are finding creative ways. We also started, an investigative team where we have 2 civil investigators, 1 criminal investigator to work on some of the reports that come through our process. What's called an election integrity violation report. Somebody has figured out how to use those reports through an automated system to file them with us. So we are getting hundreds at a time without having to do the real work that requires somebody who has a real complaint or a real issue. It's overwhelming the process, it's overwhelming the system, it's overwhelming the staff. And we have to figure out how to overcome some of these challenges.
Thank you, Secretary Aguilar. I think we have time for one more audience question, then we'll give our panelists a chance for some closing remarks. Next question. Can you please share some specifics on the training you require of election administrators and clerks? Secretary Schmidt, would you like to kick us off with this one?
Sure. And it's an especially important question given the amount of turnover that we've seen. Turnover at every level, from county election administrators to precinct election workers. So, and that's multi-causal, especially at the county level. The threat environment changing so much has certainly been a factor. Elections changing so much, albeit for the better, and the heavy lift involved in that, and all the rest has certainly contributed to the turnover. That's why the Shapiro administration set up a training team to train new election administrators in Pennsylvania. We have 67 counties. Since 2020, we've lost north of 70 senior election administrators at the county level. That's not one from every county, but we've had counties where the person responsible for running elections has changed every election. And they're sort of burning through people responsible for running them. And I think it's why that training and that support is so important, that people are prepared in a way that results in election running in a way that's free and fair and safe and secure and smooth and absent any errors, however unintentional. At the county level, they also conduct training for poll workers, the people at your local precinct, your neighbors, who are the reason why you can show up on election day, cast your vote, and have your vote counted in essentially a volunteer position, even though they might receive a little bit of compensation. It's really on election day, frankly, it's not Cisco or Lisa or me or anyone who's the most important person. It's the local precinct election workers who are the most important on election day, making sure that you can cast your vote and have your vote counted. So if you want to have an important impact on the system, I suggest that when you do show up and vote in person, should you do choose that method, that you thank them, and you thank them for their service, and you acknowledge the important role that they play and the sacrifices that they make to make sure that our representative democracy functions the way that it should.
Thank you. Secretary Aguilar, Clerk Lyons, any other additional comments on training for clerks or administrators?
I think I would just add, here in Michigan, we are required as election officials, as clerks, to be accredited, and that goes with an extensive amount of training and coursework. And then, as time goes on, then we obviously are partaking in continuing education all the time. So it's never a one and done. There's always something to build upon and make sure that this role as a clerk is professionalized, and that the public can have confidence that their election administrators are the best in the business.
Thank you for that. And I think it really is reassuring to hear that there have been such robust training efforts, given that we're all hearing the news about the turnover among administrators, that again, planning well in advance of the elections to make sure that you're training the workforce that will be there for this election. All right, well, this hour has flown by, and so we're at closing remarks time. We'll give everybody a chance to just say a few words, what they'd like to leave for our audience today. And Secretary Aguilar, will let you kick it off.
Great. Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for being here. Thank you to my fellow election administrators. You are the heroes. You are the unsung heroes of democracy. So thank you for your commitment. Thank you for your passion. I'd just like to say, after yesterday's primary here in Nevada, we know we have work to do for the general, but I am extremely committed and proud of the team that we have, both at the state level and at the local level. All 17 clerks across the state understand their responsibility, they understand their duty, and they're going to make sure that Nevada has a voice moving forward, and I'm grateful to be on their team. Thank you all.
Clerk Lyons.
Well, I just echo that gratitude for having us on this panel. And I'm just so grateful for the work that organizations like this are doing. As an election official, as one of those boots on the ground, it has been, over the last 4 years, so encouraging to know that we're not alone in being ambassadors of our election and this voter education effort, and really just I feel like we're standing shoulder to shoulder in preparation for what is one of the bedrock of our republic. So I'm just so grateful to be a part of this. I love what we do. I love this country, and I love being a part of the people selecting their government. Elections are high stakes. They're controversial. That's certainly not new, but there's definitely a spotlight like we've not seen in recent history. So all that's to say that we are ready. We're rising to the challenge. We're stepping up. Like I said previously, iron sharpens iron, and I think across the nation, our voters are going to see, secure, transparent, fair, and accurate elections they deserve.
Thank you. Secretary Schmidt, final words from you.
I also want to thank CLC for your efforts in voter education and all the rest. And I know we've talked about a lot of the challenges and we've touched on some of the ugliness surrounding elections right now. But I think it's important that none of that dissuade voters from voting. Our electoral process is something we should all embrace and something we should all celebrate. And we shouldn't let bad faith actors seeking to undermine confidence in the results based on no basis in fact from dissuading any voter, Democratic or Republican or other, from casting their vote and having their vote counted. Voting is not complicated. It is done in a way that should be accessible and maintain the integrity of the process. And voters should have confidence in our election results, no matter what the nonsense is that sometimes surrounds elections. So I would just encourage people to be optimistic about elections. When it comes to the precinct people we talked about, we may have lost a lot of people running elections, but we have a lot of people stepping up to fill those gaps because they understand the importance of this and the civic responsibility incumbent on all of us to make sure that our system of government functions the way that it should. And I'm grateful for their efforts.
Thank you. And Lata, final words from you.
Oh, I get the final thought. So I work on voting rights policy at CLC, and I advocate for laws and regulations that allow more eligible voters to make their voices heard. But election administrators, they're the folks that implement policies in the real world. And I just have to say that I'm really honored to be on this panel of election administrators. It's you guys and your colleagues who keep elections fair. Election officials just being that dedicated to ensuring that every vote is properly counted and that everything runs smoothly. It's such an important job. I'm so glad that you do it. And I'm so glad that you are professionals who are so very good at what you do.
Thank you. Well, I just want to echo the notes of gratitude and thank our panelists for joining us today. We really appreciate all the work you do day in and day out to make elections run so smoothly in your states. And we also appreciate that you would take the time to do the outreach and to make the system more transparent and to speak to our audience and take the time out of your busy schedule. So again, thank you very much. And we look forward to certainly eventful, but ultimately smooth election this year in all of your states. Thank you.
Thank you all. Appreciate it.